I got in the car and it said 98 degrees, and I believed every bit of it. I don't know. That may have just been from sitting out on the blacktop, but it was right warm. Anybody else need a copy of the lesson? I have some extras. Okay. Let's have a prayer together as we begin our class tonight. Father, we're grateful for the day. We appreciate the fact that you have given us the beauty of this part of the world to live in, and we thank you for that. May it always remind us of your majesty and grandeur. We thank you that at the close of this day, we are here together in this building, cool and comfortable, and with your word opened, studying it, trying to find those things that would help us as we live our lives for you. We thank you for each person who's here and ask you to bless them. We know that there are some who are sick and not able to be here, and ask you to watch over them and keep them. This we pray all through the name of Jesus. Amen. This is the third event in the period of consideration. And the period of consideration, if you remember, is when Jesus is being put out to see what people think about him. And this includes his visit to Cana of Galilee, where there's going to be a wedding, or where there was a wedding. And it's kind of interesting what the people thought about him, and what his own mother thought about him, and what the apostles thought about him. So we have all of that wrapped up in this story. We'll get right into the questions. What is the third day in relation to? And chapter 2 says on the third day. Who wants to take a guess at that? Maybe. I'm going to tell you right up, I don't know. I love asking questions I don't know the answer to. Because if you look this one up, the answers are all over the page. Some believe, as you said, Penny, that it is the third day of the wedding. We know the wedding had been going on for some time because they had run out of wine. And so maybe it is the third day of the wedding. Some believe it's the third day of the journey from where they were, where he met with Nathanael, to Cana of Galilee. That makes fairly good sense because it is about 10 miles. And if you're walking, casually going along, it may have taken nearly 3 days to do that. Some say the third day of his ministry, and that makes no sense because actually we can count up about 7 days of his ministry up to this point. So it's not the third day of his ministry. Some say it was the third day involving a miracle that he was going to perform, and that goes back to the beginning of the wedding, which is what Penny said. And the wedding actually ran for 3 days, and the miracle took place. I don't know. I would think that is probably the third day after his meeting with Nathanael. Do you remember where Nathanael was from?
Same place, sir.
Cana, yeah. Nathanael was from Cana, which was about 10 miles northeast of Nazareth. And so it may be that that's what it was, since the last big event of his meeting with Nathanael and choosing him. That maybe makes the most sense. I don't know. I just thought this will be fun because people will be guessing and they'll get in on it, and I won't know what to tell them the answer is. Proves my ignorance, doesn't it? It could be any of 2 or 3 things. Now, one thing I do know, that according to the Mishnah, if you're into reading the Mishnah a lot, which is one of the sacred books of the Jewish nation, it says that the weddings of a virgin customarily began on Wednesday. And so it was normally done in the middle of the week. And if you count then from Wednesday, how far along were they in the wedding already? We don't know, but probably the wedding began on a Wednesday. At least that was the custom of the day. And it was certainly a big deal. Not that weddings today are not big deals. Perhaps the biggest deal of the wedding is all that goes on before it. The choosing of the gown and the getting of the tuxedos and the sending out of the cards and the getting a venue and deciding where you're going to have a reception and all of that. The big deal of the wedding was the wedding feast. And that could go on for a week. And we seem to be in that period in John 2, the part that involved the feast. Remember we said there were three parts to the wedding? You remember what the first part was? It was the arrangement part where deal was done so that a couple could get married. That was usually done by the parents. And then there was the betrothal part, where years later sometimes they exchanged their vows and a dowry was paid, and then they went back home to their parents. And sometime after that, there was the wedding feast, where they celebrated for about a week, and then they went to their own home and had their own family. Why do you think an understanding of weddings in Jesus' day is important to understanding this event?
Being prepared for that long week.
Yeah, we don't think of weddings taking a week, do we? A feast taking a week. You know, sometimes it's you get together and you have a reception after the ceremony, and that lasts a little bit. And you don't think about going out for a feast that lasts a week. And you don't think of it being something that involves the community. Weddings were a thing then to bind a community together. Often in communities, everybody was related. And so a wedding was a deal for all of the family to get together. And that should not be so surprising to us. Some of us grew up in areas where everybody who lived in that particular little town were related. I grew up in Gilmer County, West Virginia. That's where at least my ancestral home. And the post office box is Shock, West Virginia. And it is really aptly named. It's in Gilmer County if you ever want to go check it out. But it is a shock to get on that creek and drive up it. And so I was related to everybody who was there. And I couldn't get away with anything because they were all aunts and uncles and cousins and related in some way. And so I got in trouble. They had to paddle my caboose and send me back home. And it was okay. Nobody said you can't do that. Now, if the neighbor would paddle one of your children and send them home, you might have a conniption over that. But Shock, West Virginia, that was the way things were, buddy. And I was just related to everybody. And sometimes in little villages, and Cana was a relatively small village, about everybody was related. And so here they have a chance to get together. And so it lasted a week. It was usually, the wedding feast was usually done in the groom's hometown. Today, if you get married, it's kind of like you do to the bride's hometown or the church that she belongs to, and that's where you get married. But at this time, it was usually done in the groom's hometown. And so probably the groom was a person from Cana, as was Nathanael. And since it was a small town, what might you think?
He was related.
That they would have known each other, yeah. Why they got the invitation, why Christ and his apostles were invited. There may be another reason. We're going to explore that in a minute. But that may have been one of the reasons why Christ and the apostles were invited, is because of Nathanael. What might make you think that either the bride or the groom was related to Jesus? Now, again, this is somewhat of a guesstimate, but I think there's some validity here.
Because Mary was there, he was there, he could bring a whole bunch of people with him.
Mary was there. Mary and Jesus and the apostles were invited. Mary's named. And generally, if there is an issue at the wedding, who knows about it? Usually just the in crowd. Unless you have Facebook and then you put it out there on Facebook. But he said that with tongue in cheek, by the way, if you're wondering. I married my niece and her husband, and we had more at the wedding than they thought were coming. And they absolutely ran out of stuff. And so here's her dad, my wife's sister's husband, who's making an immediate run to the store to buy more stuff. You can only cut pieces of the cake so thin. And then you don't even get a smell. That's the way we handle it around here. If there are more people come than you think, you just cut the pieces smaller. And you can only put, so many little crackers on there and with stuff on them. And so how many people you think knew about that? Well, I did, because I asked my wife, where's he gone? Why is Russ not here any longer? Well, he went to the store. We ran out of stuff. Generally, it's an insider. But not only that. Do you remember what she said to the servants? Whatever he says to you, do it. Now, would a stranger come up and say to somebody else's servants that? Probably unlikely. And so she obviously had some standing in that situation. So when she said, whatever he says to you, do it, I imagine they saluted and said, yes, ma'am. So it may very well be that this is indeed the city of Nathanael, and Nathanael might have been related to the groom, but Mary might have been related to the bride. And she seemed to be a person of standing in the wedding ceremony and all that went on, wedding feast and all that went on. Does that make sense? And, questions like that are not ones that are on the test to get into heaven, I assure you. But one thing it does, I think it gives you some insight into what's going on in Bible times. If you just read, okay, Jesus went to a wedding and performed a miracle. But when you understand something about the wedding and what went on and how it was conducted, then I think it takes on new meaning. What does the interaction between Mary and Jesus tell you about their relationship? And I think it tells you more than one thing.
She knew who he was, and he was very respectful of his mother.
I believe she thought he could fix it. Now, why else would she take the problem to him? They've run out of wine. Why do you tell that to somebody unless you feel like maybe they can do something about it? And in all of that, he is respectful of her. Now, some people think that he wasn't. And a part of that is based upon the fact that in our King James or our New King James Bibles, he says woman. He calls her woman in verse 4. And they say that's rather disrespectful. Ah, what's the danger of that reasoning?
You're taking it out of context of the time.
Yes,
In the translation.
we're looking at it through 21st century eyes and not first century eyes. The closest English translation would actually be madam. Madam, I don't really have anything to do with this. And as a matter of fact, that was a term that he used in referring to other women who were involved with him in some way. He would call them woman, which was tantamount to calling them madam. But I think it also shows that their relationship was changing. While the relationship was, you can fix this, son, I know you can. And how did she know that? He had not performed any other miracles because this is his first miracle. But, you know, a mama knows, right?
You just create distance by saying madam and not mom.
He was no ordinary child, and she knew that, right? Yeah. He was no ordinary child, and she knew that he was. And as you may remember, back when he was 12, when Mary and Joseph had gone seeking for him in Jerusalem when he was left behind, he said, don't you know? She said, your father and I have been looking for you. And he says, don't you know that I must be about my father's business? And he wasn't talking about Joseph. He was talking about God. And so I see it changing here because he says to her, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? I know that's a big deal with you, Mom. However, it's not a priority with me. Did you ever stop and think that Jesus did not generally perform miracles that in any way benefited himself? And he never wanted paid for them. It was something that he did, and they were done benevolently to people who were in genuine need.
He didn't do them when he was challenged.
What's that?
He didn't do them when he was challenged.
That's exactly right.
He didn't need to prove it, except for maybe in this case.
Yes. This one seems to be a little unique among all of the miracles that Jesus performed, and I will grant that indeed. It may say that he did understand that his whole life and relationship with her was changing. But do you notice what Mary didn't do? She didn't take any offense. She didn't say, how dare you talk to me like that? She just said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Now, I said last week, that's one thing I would like to have been there to see. I just think the dynamic of that was terrific. When he says, what's that to me? And she says to the servants, whatever he says, do it. She just walks away. And he's standing there going like, Mom, I guess I better do something about this. And he does. So she takes no offense, which I think is very interesting. She simply instructed the servants what to do.
When he said, my hour has not come, do you think she understood what he was talking about?
Did she understand what, honey?
When he said, my hour has not come, do you think she understood that?
I don't know that she understood that. Because hour is the marker through John of time. And he's going to say repeatedly up until chapter 13, my hour has not yet come. In chapter 13, he's going to say, my hour has come. I don't know that she got that part. But I think what Jesus is saying there, and there's a question about that later, I think what Jesus is saying there, I'm kind of on a time clock here. And I don't want to do anything before it's time to do it. He wanted to make sure that the world was ready, the preemptive work had been done before he manifested himself. And this is going to be a pretty big splash, don't you think? When he creates all of that wine, don't you think that word's going to get around? And I wonder how many invitations he got to weddings after that. Like, hey, let's get this guy to come. He can help us if we get in a situation.
Hey, Tom, do you think that she, maybe Mary felt, like as a family, she was like, we ran out of wine, and it sort of put the family in a kind of a mess.
Well, yes, I would think that running out of wine at a wedding at that time was an embarrassing situation, just like when we ran out of food for the wedding that I conducted so many years ago. That was kind of an embarrassing thing, and you're trying to tread water there to get it all taken care of so everybody doesn't know about it. Everybody gets served something.
Maybe he felt that too, like, okay,
It may be.
Mom's embarrassed.
Yeah.
I need to take
Yeah, and I think he did it personally for his mother as much as for anything else. I think he did it for her as much as anything else. What details does John give regarding the water pots used in this miracle, and why is that important? You tell me what details he gives. Just give me one of them.
There was 6.
There were 6 of them. So he tells you how many there were. What else does he tell you? He said that they held 20 to 30 gallons. What else does he tell you?
The purifying.
They were for the purifying of the Jews. That's right. What else does he tell you? They were made out of stone. And when he gives the instructions, what does he tell them to do?
Fill them to the brim.
Fill them to the brim. Now, why do we need to know that? You don't need to accept that it tells you something about John's writings. And I have said this repeatedly, and you may be getting tired of hearing it, but John is the details guy. He's the apostle who gives you the minutia. He was present. He knew. He saw. He was aware of what went on. In Mark 7, there is an account of Jesus' disciples eating with unwashed hands as they went through the field where the grain was. And the Jewish leaders got all excited about that. Why have your disciples eat with unwashed hands? Now, our first blush at that is that they were eating with dirty hands. But that's not it. They went through purification rites just to eat food. They washed their hands in a ceremonial way. It wasn't, what is the song you're supposed to sing when you wash your hands or when you brush your teeth or whatever it is, so you do it long enough and you scrub in there, and it wasn't that kind of thing. They did it in a ceremonial way, like doctors do that you've seen, where they wash their hands and they go in and their hands are like this and they're dripping, and somebody puts the coat on them, the lab thing, where they go in to operate. It was that kind of thing. That's how they wash their hands, because they might be contaminated, because some sinner might have walked by and the shadow fell on them. And that made them ceremonially unclean. And so they went through a lot of ceremony. So John was even aware of all of that stuff that went on. Not for sanitary purposes, but the washing was for ceremonial purposes. And he was well aware of everything that was going on, and the size and the amount that they held and all of that kind of stuff. Now, what does a comparison of John 2:4, John 7:30, John 8:20, and John 13:1 tell you about Jesus' reluctance to be involved? This is what we were talking about, Barbara. In those first 3 passages, my hour has not yet come. It's not time. Well, why couldn't Jesus just do this anytime?
He only does what his Father shows him. He only does what his Father shows him.
And that's hard for us to get our minds wrapped around, don't you think? There's a song in the religious area called An On-Time God. And he has showed up late for what other people, he was late getting to Lazarus's death, but he was right on time. And that's the point of the song. He only operates on a certain timeline. He wants to make sure that everything's just ready. I don't know all that goes into that. There's no way I could explain that to you because it's God who arranges that. And I don't have the mind of God. And so I can't tell you exactly why it wasn't time yet, but you can imagine that everything was falling into place. Everything was getting ready. He wanted to make sure that the world was ready for him before he ever made his debut, so to speak. And so the time is not yet. The hour has not yet come. It is my hour, and I recognize it. Yes, Rusty?
Makes you wonder how she knew he was capable of doing it. Did she see his power before?
Help me with that one.
I was thinking that too. Like, I think Mary, you asked how did she know that he was capable of doing anything about this?
Yes.
But I mean, I can't help but think this is the first recorded miracle that we have. But he lived with her.
Yes.
And I'm sure she saw, he could have fixed a boo-boo or something. Or one of his brothers. I mean,
Yeah.
she probably saw things before this.
There's one of the Gospels, not in our canon, but it's called pseudepigrapha. Isn't that a great word? Doubtful. Has to do with some of the supposed things that Jesus did. And he was supposed to have struck a little boy dead one time, a little playmate, all that kind of stuff. We don't know what kind of stuff that Jesus did growing up. But Mary knew him and knew that he was no ordinary child. Now, had he done anything miraculous? Well, the only reason I would doubt it is that this is clearly stated as his first miracle, unless you say it was the first miracle when he began his ministry. That's not what it says. I don't know. But I'm sure she knew that he was no ordinary child and could, if he wanted to, he could fix the situation. Yes, Jody.
If you think back to that temple incident, at the very end it says that Mary hid all these things in her heart.
Yes, yes,
And to me that says that she thought about those things.
yes, yeah.
That she got all those things and she ruminated on them.
Yeah, that's when he was at 12 at the temple. She hid all of those things in her heart.
And to me, that says she thought about that. And I think as a mother, if you got those kinds of incidents and just how he was conceived, she knew how the angel came with her and all of that. And you think she's got all of that to think about.
Yeah, yeah.
That she knows what he's doing.
Yeah, how could you be that boy's mom and not know that he was no ordinary child? That doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah. Okay. Assuming, now where is Jamie? She's the one that tried to work this out last time for us. Assuming the water pots average 25 gallons each, I just split the difference between 20 and 30. How many 5-ounce servings would this miracle have provided, and what is the significance of that fact? Who has it?
3840.
Yeah, 3840. That's exactly right. Math guy, is that what we're supposed to say? Yeah. Yeah. If you take the fact that there were 150 gallons in 6 water pots, if you take the fact that there's 128 ounces in a gallon, and you multiply those two, it's 19,200 ounces. If you divide that by 5, it's 3,840. Now, I looked in my notes back from 100 years ago when I took John in college, and our professor had us do it on 8-ounce servings. I guess one or more wine, I'm not sure. And if you do 8-ounce servings, it's 2,400 servings. Now, what's the significance of that?
There's either a lot of people there or they got really drunk.
That's exactly it. Couldn't have said it any better. Either there were a bunch of people there, and remember, it goes on for a week, so we don't know how much of it had already passed. It had been going on. They had run out of wine. I don't know how much they started with. Probably more than a bottle of Mogan David, I would guess, or Welch's, I'm not sure. But they had run out, and now they have 150 gallons more. So either they've got days left and a lot of people, or the people are drinking more than we would think they did. That also says something to me about if the wine was alcoholic, and if so, how much. Now, people love to use this passage as a defense for drinking alcohol. And they say, look, Jesus made 150 gallons of wine at a minimum, probably. And so it's all right. Let me take you to 1 Peter 4:3. And I want you to notice something there. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lusts, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Now, you may have another word there, but the word originally means drinking parties. If this wine was high octane of any kind, would you not think that that was one really big drinking party? And if so, doesn't that throw you into a little bit of a bind with a verse like this? That Jesus was contributing to something that is condemned in Scripture. And I personally have a problem with that. Now, the reasoning by people is, well, I understand that drunkenness is condemned, and so you're not supposed to get drunk. Well, it is, time and again. But here, parties where they drink is also condemned. Now, we'll have more to say about that. So if you've got a rebuttal or a question, if you can hang on to it for just a few minutes, we may get there tonight, okay? Does the fact that Jesus was called a gluttonous man and a winebibber in Luke 4:34 indicate that he was? Why did they call him that then?
Because he ate and drank with common people, sinners, tax collectors.
Yes, the contrast is with John the Baptist. John the Baptist was a bit weird. Any way you slice that. He wore motorcycle gear, leather clothes, had a beard, long hair, had a Nazarite vow. What could a Nazarite not do? Drink wine. Absolutely. Could not drink wine.
Touch a dead body. Cut their hair.
And yes, couldn't touch dead bodies, be in relation to any dead bodies. They had some real tight rules. And so he lived out in the desert and ate locusts and wild honey. I know that if Rusty was there, he would go get the hive. The swarm, right? But the locust, I'm not real sure about that. I don't know whether I'd want to eat locusts or not. And here comes Jesus. Into town, and they say, come and have dinner. He says, sure. And so he is a sociable being, where John was a recluse. And they said, John was weird, but this guy's a gluttonous man, the wine bibber. They were looking at something to say that might cast him in a bad light. And it really didn't work. It also said he was a friend of sinners. You know, anyway, and he was. Any way they could discredit him, it was not beneath them to do it. And so that's what they said. Now here's number 9, and we got a little bit of time to get to this. What word is used in this passage for wine? And what does that, does that tell us anything about the alcoholic content of the wine made from the water? Did you look up the word?
Oinos.
Oinos, that's right, oinos.
Something, it said that makes, both kinds of wine. Kind you can get drunk on and just
Say it again.
fermented or
Alcoholic or non-alcoholic.
Yes. Yes. Oinos does not tell you the alcoholic content of the wine. It's just a generic word for grape juice of any kind, of any degree. Now, if you look up wine in an English dictionary, it's going to say something like, I did look it up, the fermented juice of grapes used as alcoholic beverage. That's our English word. The New Testament was not written in English. It was written in Greek. So an English dictionary doesn't help us much with a Greek word. The Greek word for here is oinos, and it could refer to anything from grape juice that was still in the grape to high octane and anything in between. So when somebody says he made wine, we are left only to guess at how potent it was. And we have no reason to guess that it was high octane. We would guess that it was somewhere on that continuum somewhere, and I would think that it was very, very low, if any. And do you know what the Jews did? How they handled wine as it fermented? They cut it with water. And generally, it was 3 to 1. Water 3, wine 1. And so they wanted to make sure that they didn't get drunk from drinking the wine. And so since they didn't have all of the means that we have of handling it, they would cut it with water to make sure that it was not something that would make you drunk. I maintain that the wine that Jesus made is no argument for social drinking. If you want, I'm not pushing this on anybody, but if you want, I have a 2-page article written by a fella named Thomas C. Miller. I met him once. Has to do with John 2 and social drinking. And I would be glad for you to have a copy of it if you would like it. And so I will put them up here, and you can come and get one. And if you feel that it would be helpful to you and you want to keep it and look at it. And it has the arguments from quantity and the arguments from quality. And it's something to look at, okay? Very good. We'll pick up there next week, and then we'll get into the 4th event in this period of what did the people think of him.